Alrighty then. Think I've finally got the hang of this, so I'm going to go through the whole routine. I've been starting, stopping, and deleting. I apologize if you've been getting notifications in your social media or whatever that I'm going live, whatever. I'm a noob, and you know, noobs tend to make annoying mistakes. Welcome to this first live stream. My name's Tim Werner. And what I figured I would do here is just work through 5 MeasureUp practice questions from exam AZ-104, Microsoft Azure Administrator Associate. I want to share with you some tips, tricks, and strategies that I've found really helpful in certification preparation and analyzing because, you know, there's the hands-on skills, there's the conceptual understanding, but then there's also the practical computer-based testing skills, you know, the test-taking skills that you don't want to overlook on any of these exams. Now let me put something out on Twitter. Hang on just a second here. I'm going to send a tweet out as soon as I can get my link. Hang on a second here. Share. Let me get the share link here. This is all very new. I would imagine I'm going to get faster and faster and more precise as we go on here. I just figured rather than delay putting pre-made long-form videos on, I figured I'd just show up and do some live streaming instead and let the proverbial chips fall where they may. I'll probably remove all of this front matter from the final recorded product anyway. So while I wait for people to show up, maybe nobody will show up, who knows? All right, we're just waiting for some people to show up. I just put a couple social media messages out there. Going to kick off this live stream in just a moment. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to this first of my live stream experiences. I hope that this will prove fruitful. I just figured that instead of delaying making prepared videos for my YouTube channel, if I've got a lunch time available or break time during my day job, I can pop in here. Hi Duncan, thanks so much for showing up. I appreciate you very much. Great. I just figured I'd pop on for a half hour or so and work through some practice questions. These practice questions are going to be from exam AZ-104, Microsoft Azure Administrator Associate. I figured not only is that a good popular exam, but also we'll find that the certification skills that I cover in the next 30 minutes or so should prove helpful no matter what your certification is. So anyway, let's get off this title slide here. And the source for these practice questions is from MeasureUp. MeasureUp is Microsoft's only official practice test vendor. So it's what I recommend to my students most of the time. And I created a short link. By the way, MeasureUp doesn't know I'm doing this live stream. I hope, hey MeasureUp, if you're here or if you see this later, what's up? timw.info/MU104. And that will take you to the AZ-104 practice exam page. I like MeasureUp because they're the only practice test provider that I'm aware of that simulates the different items that you see on the exam in terms of case study and interactive items and all of that kind of stuff. The other vendors will just tend to just give you multiple choice. Anyway, let's get right into it here. I'm cognizant of your time and my time and our time. First question from AZ-104 Azure Administrator Associate is, let's just read it out together. Company 1 has various workloads running on Azure. To access applications hosted on Azure, all Company 1 users authenticate on the company1.com tenant, which has Azure Active Directory Connect Sync enabled with its on-premises AD. Company 2 owns the company2.com tenant on Azure. Company 2 signs an agreement with Company 1 And as part of that agreement, 5 users from Company 2 need to access a number of apps hosted on the Company 1 tenant. Company 2 users should be able to use single sign-on access using their existing Company 2 credentials. What should you do first? Now let's pause right here because there's some exam tips and tricks I have for you. And again, if you're just joining, welcome. This is my first live streaming experience, so it's going to be kludgy, it's going to be clumsy, there's no question about it. In the future, things will get further and further optimized. Anyway, what I want to point out here is that with Microsoft certification questions, it's interesting how it's worked in terms of verbosity. Many years ago, say Windows 2000, 2003, 2008, even 2016, the questions were almost like reading exercises. And then I found that more recently, the exam questions got briefer and briefer, which I thought was a good trend. Now it's kind of going back to old school, especially an exam like AZ-104 Azure Administrator. There's a fair amount of reading, so certainly see if you can get the exam in your language if English isn't your preferred language. If you go to the AZ-104 exam page at Microsoft Docs, you can see what localization is available. Microsoft does the most localization for the most popular certs, as I can imagine that you would know. Anyway, besides all this text, here's a tip for you right off the bat. When you're confronted with a Microsoft cert question that has a wall of text, I like to go right to the question first. I don't even bother going through the dense text. Sometimes the dense text will mention exhibits, and there's those. A lot of times there's data tables to worry about. I skip that and go right to the question so I can get right in the front of my mind. What is it exactly that Microsoft wants here? What are they asking about specifically? You need to implement the solution. It's kind of vague. But the key here is quickly without any cost. And you're going to find that the questions on these exams are very, very short, or very sharp, I should say. And they oftentimes hinge on just a few words. So in this case, you want to think about how can I complete this identity solution with basically least administrative and monetary effort. So keeping that in mind, we see that in this scenario, we're talking about identity, obviously, Azure AD. We're talking about 2 companies wanting to facilitate single sign-on, Company 2 into Company 1. It looks like Company 1 is already doing Azure AD Connect Sync. That's not even really relevant to the question. Now, MeasureUp has that in this, because if you're just joining, these are MeasureUp practice questions that we're looking at today. MeasureUp sometimes will throw in red herrings like this, but you won't find that on the real Microsoft exams. Microsoft are really good at geeking out in terms of psychometrics, and they make sure that every word in their questions counts. So anyway, let's take a look at this. We're looking to give some selected Company 2 users single sign-on into Company 1's Azure AD tenant using least administrative and cost effort. So 1, we've got enable Azure AD business to consumer authentication, and then have them use Outlook. That already seems like it's off the rails because we want to do this solution quickly and without cost. Create user accounts for the Company 2 users in the Company 1 on-premises Active Directory. Is that what you want? That would give the Company 2 users access to your apps, but then the Company 2 users would have a separate credential to worry about, right? I don't like that one either. How about this third one? Configure Active Directory Federation services to federate. Again, that's possible, but my gosh, that definitely doesn't meet our constraint. So I guess by process of elimination, let's look at add Company 2 UPNs or user principal names as guest users on the Company 1 Azure AD tenant. Yeah, I would agree with that. Bring them in as guests. So really, this question is just testing your understanding of Azure AD business to business or B2B collaboration, where you can create a guest user in your tenant. Let me bring up my browser situation here if I can find it. Yikes, I've got so many windows going on. Let me go to Azure Active Directory and let's take a look at what this question is asking us about. What it's dealing with is how to give external users single sign-on to our applications. And so if we create a new user directly in the tenant, that's going to defeat the purpose because we don't want to have multiple credentials. If we invite an external user, this initiates the Azure AD business-to-business collaboration flow. Here, our tenant is going to trust the identity provider of the invited user and rely on their authentication and then bring them in as a guest class user. And once the guest is in your tenant, as you can see, this Greg Gauthier fictional user I have has come in as a guest with his Gmail account. From an authorization standpoint, Greg and Mark, who's a native cloud user, have the same possible access. I can give them both role-based access control within Azure AD and or in our subscriptions. They're indistinguishable as far as that goes. So that's what that question was dealing with. Let's go back to the questions here. Let's see. Oh boy. All right. Question 2. All right, so right off the bat, we see that this is an example of a build list and reorder item. And these can be intimidating if you're new to Microsoft certs and you come across one of these. I don't want you to, spend time and waste extra time trying to figure out the user interface. This is a reason why I recommend that you use or consider investing in MeasureUp, because they have these type of interactive items that you can get sorted out and get ready to go. And by the way, just to repeat, I'm not in any way, shape, or form shilling for MeasureUp. MeasureUp doesn't know that I'm doing this live stream. I just genuinely believe in their practice exams, and I figured I would use no other really if I were going to do a live stream like we're doing right now. By the way, thank you very much for being here, and please feel free to communicate with me in the comments. I've got it up on my screen. I said this earlier, I'll say it again. This is my first of hopefully many live streams. And I'm a noob here, so I'm kind of fumbling and bumbling around here. I hope it's going okay for you so far. Please let me know if you've got any suggestions for improvement. Okay, what should you know about build list and reorder item types? Well, number one, you do get partial credit, all right? So if you're confronted with one of these and you're not entirely sure of the answer, please understand that you do get partial credit. So in this case, we can jump right to the question before we even look at the scenario. And it's asking for 4 actions in sequence. So we're going to need 4 of these blocks. Now, if you only brought over 2 of the 4 that were correct, you'll still get points for the 2 that you bring over. So never, ever leave a Microsoft certification question unanswered. In a worst-case scenario, if you have to guess, guess. But even if you guess, you have a greater than 0% chance of getting some points, all right? Okay, so let's look at the question. What does it say? You're asked to configure self-service password reset, or SSPR, for a subset of users in your org. And here are the requirements. It looks like there's 2. You should be able to add and remove users that are allowed to use SSPR, and you want to have the users provide 1 additional piece of personal information in order for them to reset their passwords. Which 4 actions? Okay, you'll find that the build list and reorder items are one of the ways Microsoft tries to verify your hands-on skills with their technology or in the job role. Of course, what we're covering here is the Azure Administrator job role, which is all about hands-on implementation. All right, so what do we have here? It looks like we've got create an Azure AD group. That sounds reasonable. We'll probably need that one. Enable SSR with all, enable SSPR with selected. Okay, I'll put a question mark on those. Register an authentication method. That's, again, if you've used SSPR, which is what this is validating, then that tracks. Select an Azure AD group for which you want to allow. Well, again, if you've used SSPR, you know that that's required. And then add users to the SSPR list of users. Well, that sounds kind of bogus because there's no such thing as an SSPR list of users. Now, I want to highlight that this, again, is a case where a practice test provider like MeasureUp might do something that you won't see on the live Microsoft exams. At Microsoft Learn, one of their precepts or one of their rules when they write these questions on the live exams is that the writers are not allowed to refer to non-existent things. See? So if there's no such thing as an SSPR list of users, you'll never see a reference to that on your exam. All of your choices will be real things, real technologies, products, services, and they will be plausible. At least that's the idea. You can always file a complaint with Microsoft if you feel that that's not the case. So let's take a look at the correct answer here. So step 1, create an Azure AD group that we'll use for SSPR. Enable SSPR with selected, select the group, and then finally register an authentication method. So like I said, that verifies, whoops, let me go back to my demo here. That verifies that A, you know what SSPR is, and B, you know how to use it. What is SSPR if you don't know? Well, self-service password reset is something that you want to look at when you're in a hybrid cloud environment. So you have a local Active Directory where your user base is, and now you're moving into Azure, and you've got applications. They could be Microsoft 365 applications, they could be line of business applications, whatever they are. But you want to provide your users single sign-on, so you'll use Azure AD Connect to replicate local identities into the cloud. Well, when you do that, what do you think will happen if a user tries to change their Azure AD password? If you're maintaining passwords locally, you may not want to enable self-service password reset at all. Another consideration is that in order to use self-service password reset, you have to have Azure AD Premium licenses, and you may not be in a position to do that yet. So that's the underlying use case. Where to find it in the portal is the challenge. Let me see if I can remember. Is it under password reset here? I think it might be that easy. Yeah. And you'll see the control. I have to say that this is a head scratcher for me. That when you enable or disable self-service reset, there's really just 3 options. Either nobody in your tenant, whether they're members or guests, can change their own password in the cloud. Everybody can change their password. Or, wait for it, we can do selected, and we can choose, believe it or not, just a single group. There's not a multi-select here at all. So what you need to do is create a group, and then you can nest additional groups or individual users inside it for your SSPR. So that gives your users, none, selected, or all, the ability to change their password. And then the exam item mentions authentication methods. The idea is that if a user goes to change their password in Azure AD, they have to verify that they are who they claim to be. So you specify 1 or 2 additional authentication methods. You can set it up here. And this is a nice way to onboard Azure AD users into Azure multi-factor authentication. And lastly, on registration, you can force users to do the SSPR, and you can give them an amount of time where they can postpone before they're forced to enroll. Okay? That's the idea with that. Let's come back to our slideshow here and continue. Question 3 of 5. This one, again, is an interactive item type that you see on most of the Microsoft certification exams. It's a statement analysis exam where you're given a scenario or a situation or part of a script file or whatever it might be. And then there's a table of statements that you either agree with or you don't. So what does this one say? You have a hybrid network configuration. Most user accounts are in Azure AD and the on-premises domain. Some user accounts are Azure AD only. Your company plans to deploy self-service password reset, and you need to ensure that SSPR meets your company's password reset requirements. Statement 1, SSPR is supported for all users? Yes or no? I think we demonstrated that a moment ago in my mini demo. I would agree, yes. 2, you can configure SSPR registration for all domain users by group or by individual user. Well, I think we saw that that's not the case. When you configure SSPR, it's one Azure AD group, unfortunately. And then 3rd, authentication methods include mobile phone, text messages, and even voice calls. Well, you might have missed that in the interface. But yes, you can actually have Azure do a robocall and verify that the user has their device. You know, that's the idea with multi-factor authentication. Let me see here. Got some spam. With YouTube, it's almost impossible to avoid I was going to say scam, span, the same thing. So I'm trying to address that situation that's happening in the chat here. Okay. And I'm sure that over time and future runs of this live stream experience, I'll get better at trapping garbage that might show up in the chat. You're the opposite of garbage. Thank you for being here, the rest of you. Question 4 of 5 from MeasureUp AZ-104, Microsoft Azure Administrator Associate. Again, it's a statement analysis. I chose this one because it involves a little bit of PowerShell, and here it's a good opportunity to say that for just about all of the Microsoft Associate, Expert, and Specialty exams, you're going to be seeing some Azure PowerShell, most likely in addition some Azure command line interface. Why? Well, because these are the main scripting automation languages. You'll also find, depending upon the certification exam, you might find some Python, believe it or not. There's so much native Python happening in Microsoft. I mean, Guido van Rossum, the inventor of Python, is a Microsoft employee himself. So anyway, in terms of PowerShell and Azure CLI, I would say that you need to have intermediate skills. Not expert necessarily, but certainly not beginner either. In other words, you have to be able to interpret this code in context. This is just a single one-liner, but on the live exam, you might see part of a PowerShell or Azure CLI script, and you may be required to fill in the blanks. There's another item type called active item or active screen, where the code has interspersed drop-down list controls, where you can demonstrate that you understand how that code works by filling in the blanks interactively, you see. So anyway, your company's hired a new cloud engineer. You need to delegate some privileges as global administrator. Wow, you're going to give the new engineer global admin? That's pretty generous. To do this, we're going to create a custom role, and it shows us using new AZ role definition, bringing in a JSON definition. The content is shown in the exhibit. Unfortunately, I forgot to include the exhibit, so it's not going to help us answer these questions. I realized that just a moment before starting the live stream. But as you can see, these are pretty discrete statements that require that you understand what a custom role definition looks like. So here you're understanding PowerShell, that this new AZ role definition is what you can do to upload a custom role-based access control role to Azure. You need the JSON definition and the new AZ role definition. As long as you're signed in to your Azure tenant and attached to a subscription with appropriate permissions yourself, you can absolutely do that. Now let me go to VS Code because I have some sample code here. I've got PowerShell 7 installed. I've installed the Azure Powershell modules, and I've just got some sample code up here. So the general pattern when we're creating a custom role-based access control role is that you can query Azure Resource Manager and the resource providers within ARM to look at what operations are in there. For example, what if you wanted to customize the default built-in virtual machine contributor RBAC role to give some permissions, maybe more granular permissions for virtual networks? If you've ever worked with virtual machine contributor, it gives the role holder full read-write for the virtual machine resource, but it gives them rather limited control over the underlying virtual network. So instead of doing multiple role assignments, you might want to create a single custom role that incorporates operations from both of those resource providers. And notice that the resource provider path is Microsoft.something, and then it goes down the hierarchy. The star means anything below that level. So if I right-click and run this, this should give us a list of all of the create, read, update, and delete operations that are found under there. Now you can go out to the REST, the ARM, the Azure Resource Manager REST API reference if you want to get all these operations there. I'm just showing you some PowerShell to do a quick lookup. And then if we want to start our custom role with Virtual Machine Contributor, I can do this. I can create a new, looks like my credentials expired. Let's see here. Yeah, looks like I'm going to have to do a connect AZ account to sign into my subscription, which I'll do. It's a browser-based flow. I'm signing in on another monitor. Let me reload. And anyway, what we can see on line 5 here is we're getting an existing definition. Actually, it's line 7. We're getting the virtual machine contributor role definition, converting the object to JSON, and then creating an out file on my D drive. I'm actually in the wrong tenant here, but that doesn't matter. And then we can do a code dvmc 2022.json to bring that JSON file into another VS Code editor, which should show up in a moment. Wow, I didn't realize how much live streaming taxes your computer. And I've got a really hot rod machine here too. I can only imagine what a more commodity machine would be like. Stefan, thanks for being here. Yeah, the live stream's going to be in my YouTube channel when it finishes. I may trim out if there's extra junk at the beginning. I don't want people to have to sit through just waiting in silence. But yeah, it'll be on my YouTube channel, so you can check it out at any time that you want to. So here we have the virtual machine contributor. We would need to change this, of course, if we're doing a custom role. We're going to have to change the name. And we're going to need to change the globally unique identifier. We could use new GUID to create a new GUID, or we could just change 1 or 2 characters is enough for now. If it's a custom role, it's going to be true for is custom. We'll want to customize the description. This is the tooltip help that will show up in the portal. VM and network management, whatever, and want to make that a bit more impactful. And then we've got in the rest of the file actions, not actions, data actions, not data actions, and assignable scopes. And basically we've got what operations are allowed, what operations are explicitly forbidden. The not actions is interesting because it's a way to do refinement. Still getting that spam garbage in here. I can only imagine, I'm just mentioning this as an aside, I can only imagine the effort that some people put into, entrepreneurship, for lack of a better term, but for this kind of spam garbage and a way to make money doing that kind of garbage instead of something that could be of service to others. I find that very curious, the psychology at play there. Maybe that's why I'm a true crime buff. Anyway, I was saying that the actions all deal with that ARM REST API operations namespace. And this is showing us all the operations that you can do if you're a VM contributor. Now, you'll notice that, for example, here, we've got Microsoft.SQL Virtual Machine star. Now, that's going to allow every operation under that namespace. What if there's an operation further down the namespace that you'd want to disallow? That's where not actions can be a really helpful thing, okay? Now, as far as data and not data, that deals with services that have a strong separation between the management plane and the data plane. Think of a storage account where if you were giving read-write to the storage account services, you'd do that up here in actions and non-actions. But then to do operations that are allowed or explicitly forbidden for things like blobs and tables and queues, the actual data, that's the idea of data actions. And then lastly, we have this assignable scopes. This determines where in the Azure, thank you, Alan. This determines the level in the Azure management hierarchy where your custom role is available. So at the very bottom, you've got the resource level, like the virtual machine. Then you've got your resource group. Then you've got your subscription. If you have multiple subscriptions, you'll probably be using management groups in order to aggregate them and put governance at the management group level. And then ultimately, at the very top of the management hierarchy, you've got Azure AD itself. So assignable scopes is a comma-separated array. We can see that with the square bracket notation, where you can put this custom role at any of these levels. Now, the level is inheritable, which means that if we put a scope at the subscription level, then that RBAC custom role will be available for use here, here, and here. They're going to cascade downwards by inheritance. Now, we'll finish this up, but I want to go back to the slides because I think the last question deals with that particular question of assignable scopes. Let me go down here. Question 5. Let me bring it up full screen. All right, so again, we have a statement analysis. And no, this is the one we were just looking at. Here's question 5. All right, yes. You're the global administrator for the following Azure subscriptions. 00, those are meant to be subscription IDs. On the live exam, maybe it would show you an exhibit, a picture. The company hires a new network engineer. You need to grant this network engineer the required privileges to manage network-related resources in each subscription. You decide to do a custom role definition using a JSON template. Now you're setting the Assignable Scopes property, and you need to ensure that your solution requires least administrative effort. So which scope should you use? All right, so we've got 2 subs, and we want to give network engineer permissions and a custom role that apply to both subs. So again, this is a clever question because it's testing not only our understanding of custom JSON RBAC role definitions, but it also verifies that we understand those management scope hierarchies. So what would we do here for our assignable scopes? Will we just do /? Would we do, how many choices are there here? Subscription 0001. I'm thinking this one right here. Let's take a look and see what MeasureUp has. Yeah, that's right. So it looks like in this case, for our assignable scopes, we're doing a single JSON file, but because we're able to reference multiple subscriptions within our single Azure Active Directory tenant, that's a perfectly legal thing to do. And this would ensure that our new custom RBAC role would be available for use in both of those subscriptions. Now that brings up a point that in Azure Active Directory, although each subscription can trust only a single Azure Active Directory at a time, it's a very common pattern, maybe this is your daily experience, that your business has multiple subscriptions all in the same tenant. Why? Well, the multiple subscriptions give really nice cost separation, number one. But number 2, we have a single management plane for identity. And I guess I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the live stream. All 5 of these practice questions are from the identity and access part of exam AZ-104 Azure Administrator. That's the idea here. So to wrap this up, let's go back to VS Code here. And let me bring up the terminal. And let me clear the screen first of all. Get AZ subscription. And I'm going to use the subscription name parameter. Grab the name of my subscription. And I'm just going to do a little shorthand notation here by putting that statement in parentheses. We then can invoke what's called the dot accessor to grab just the subscription ID. Why do we need that? Well, we need that for our assignable scopes. Assuming that I want to link this new custom role at the subscription scope, I'm going to need that value. So I can put that into my clipboard here, and I can start in with /subscriptions, and then just lay it in like that. And if I had another subscription, I could just add a comma and add in that second assignable scope. Now, we could go all the way out to the resource group if you want to be really intentional and granular, but that's not going to be a particularly scalable solution. Now, let me jump back to demo mode. I'm going to have to note to self, during Livestream 2, make sure that there's the minimum number of windows to make these alt tabs a bit easier to work with. Oh boy, yeah. So let me go back home in the portal here. What I was saying is that one-to-many relationship between your Azure AD tenant and your subscriptions. So how many subs do I have in here now? It looks like just 1, but this of course could be a list. And the idea with these subscriptions is that you can move them. There may be some restrictions depending upon what kind of subscription offer you're working with. But notice here on the overview page for my subscription, I can change the directory. So your business might have need for a fundamental separation of not only cost management, but identity and governance. So you create an additional Azure AD tenant. You're not going to be able to delete or manage any resources in that new tenant unless and until you have at least one subscription trusting that tenant. So if I wanted to, I could choose another tenant, like the aptly named insert domain tenant. Here I have. Anyway, notice that you have to verify that you understand that by moving this subscription to another Azure AD tenant, some resources might be orphaned, particularly things like RBAC assignments. Now, hopefully that makes all the sense in the world, because you're taking this subscription and its resources and putting them in a completely different identity context. But you definitely want to look at this Learn More link, because there's some other things that you may need to fix up after moving your subscription to a new Azure AD tenant. I think that's about all I want to say here. Alan, thanks very much for your help. I appreciate you for that spammer thing. Maybe there's a YouTube Studio plugin, kind of like, I remember it's been a long time since I've worked with WordPress, but there are some pretty nice anti-spam plugins available there. I wonder if there's something analogous that I can do. I'll look into that. All right, any questions, comments, concerns, curiosities before we wrap up? Just wanted to go through those 5 items there. And like I said, in the comments now or afterwards, because this session is going to be in my YouTube channel permanently, I'm happy to go in whatever direction you want with these live streams. Because I've been getting requests for cert-prep, I figured this was an okay place to start. And I just want to finish up by